Genesis 4. And Adam knew Eve his wife, and she conceived and bare Cain, and said, I've gotten a man from the Lord. And she again bare his brother Abel. And Abel was a keeper of sheep, but Cain was a tiller of the ground. And in process of time it came to pass that Cain brought of the fruit of the ground an offering unto the Lord. And Abel, he also brought of the firstlings of his flock, and of the fat thereof. And the Lord had respect unto Abel, and to his offering, but unto Cain and to his offering he had not respect. And Cain was very wroth, and his countenance fell. I'm kind of continuing on a thought that the Lord has given me over the last couple of weeks. Cain and Abel are types. And I want you to see some things that God showed me this week that I just think are just absolutely amazing. But Cain represents your religious soul like we talked about last week, while Abel represents your spirit man. It's not like Cain is out there and Abel is in here. Cain represents your soul. Abel represents the spirit man inside of you. Your Cain, I want you to get this part. Your Cain is driven to please God. Your Cain, the Cain side of you, is driven to please God, and he works hard at everything he does in his attempt to please God. The amazing thing about it is your Cain literally has no idea that God will totally reject his offering. Look at 1 Corinthians 3:11. For other foundation can no man lay that is laid, which is Jesus Christ. Now if any man build upon this foundation, gold, silver, precious stones, wood, hay, and stubble, every man's work shall be made manifest. For the day shall declare it, because it shall be revealed by fire. And the fire shall try how many men? Every man's work of what sort it is. If any man's work abide, which he's built thereupon, he shall receive a reward. If any man's work be burned, he shall suffer loss, but he himself shall be saved, yet so as by fire. I want to explain some things to you today. I want to clear some things up. I want to confuse some things. Every believer will be tried by fire. No one is exempt. Every believer, everyone who calls themselves a believer will be tried. They'll be tried by fire, and all the bad be burned. We used to go hear the Pell Brothers sing that. My friends, you works, they're going to be tried by fire. Just like Cain and Abel, every one of us will stand before God and be evaluated. Every one of us. The judgment will be a shock of epic proportion to Christians. An eye-popping, jaw-dropping, you got to be kidding me time in the church's fast-approaching future. Now listen, God won't shout, He won't criticize or berate or rebuke or scold or reprimand you. Your entire life's work will simply be put into His all-consuming fire. And you will immediately realize what a waste of life religion has been when you see what remains of what you've done. Your kingdom position will be determined by what is left after the fire. Amazingly, Rick Joyner talked about this in his book too. And I always saw it and couldn't understand it until I began to study it. Great men who have been greatly admired, honored, and revered for their ministries on earth will watch in horror as their entire life investment is instantly reduced to worthless ash. The souls of men build great and impressive things on earth that will be revealed as useless and good for nothing in the presence of God. Remember this. The beauty of the soul that is impressive to humanity is absolutely offensive to God. The beauty of the soul. When men see things that come from the souls of men, and they're impressed with the things of the souls of men, those things are absolutely offensive to God. The things that Paul wrote about here in 1 Corinthians 3 were already taught by Jesus. I want to look at Matthew 13, starting in verse 40. As therefore the tares are gathered and burned in the fire. Everybody thought this was talking about non-Christians. This is not it. The tares will be burned in the fire, so shall it be in the end of this world. The Son of Man shall send forth his angels. They shall gather out of where? His kingdom. All things that offend and them which do iniquity. And shall cast them into a furnace of fire. This is literally the same thing Paul was talking about. Cast them into a furnace of fire. There shall be wailing and gnashing of teeth. Then shall the righteous shine forth as the sun in the kingdom of their Father. Whoever has ears to hear, let him hear. Jesus was telling this. I understand that Christianity teaches that those who weep and gnash their teeth are all sinners in hell. How many have heard that forever? That sinners in hell weep and gnash their teeth. It's absolutely not what this is talking about. That potentially is true. I'm not going to debate any of that. All I'm saying is this is not that. What Jesus was teaching here, this is not, I guarantee you, this is not that. This is the judgment of the kingdom. How many understand that? How many can understand in plain, simple language? Jesus was telling, this is the judgment of the kingdom. This is when the souls of men will suffer the loss of all they've believed in and all they've held on to as being absolute truth, and they will see it reduced to nothing in front of them. Every one of us will lose things and we'll go, oh, you've got to be kidding. Listen, God's not going to have to convince you. His fire will do the talking for him. He doesn't have to say a word. He literally will just throw it into a fire. And every one of us, every last single person who's a believer will have this happen. This is the judgment of the believer. This furnace of fire that Jesus was mentioning, that Paul mentioned, isn't a place where you'll be cast for torment or punishment for eternity. That's not what this is. It's the fire of revelation. And this fire will reveal the difference between what came from your soul and what came from your spirit. This is the only thing. Humanity can't tell you. Your religion can't tell you. What you believe now can't tell you the difference. In order to understand what Jesus taught, you have to look at his teaching through the eyes of one who was familiar with the kingdom. He wasn't a Christian teaching the soulish ways of the religion of Christianity. Jesus' ways are not the ways of the knowledge of good and evil like we talked about last week, where churches have become schools to school people in the knowledge of good and evil. This isn't what was coming from the mouth of Jesus. I want to show you something, and it just follows the same line. God showed me this week really plain. You know, the weird thing is, if you don't understand something, it's hard to see it. How many understand that? John talks in the book of Revelation about scorpions with tails that spit fire. They sting, and they have the face of a man. And he was describing helicopters. But John had no idea. He was describing helicopters. He saw what looked like a scorpion flying through the air, a large scorpion with fire in its tail and the face of a man. How many can see that? But John had never seen that. How many understand we've never seen the kingdom? So when Jesus teaches us something, it looks like a scorpion with fiery tail to us, but to Jesus, he sees a helicopter. When Jesus is explaining, he's telling it something that he's familiar with, but we're not familiar with it because we've never seen it. So we've got to be able to, how many understand we've got to be able to see it in the Spirit? Look at Matthew 7, 13 and 14. Enter ye in at the straight gate, for wide is the gate, and broad is the way that leads to destruction. And many there be which go in thereat. Because straight is the gate, and narrow is the way which leads to life, and few there be that find it. Again, Jesus isn't a Christian preacher, and he's not warning you not to follow the crowds into an eternal hell. That's not what he's warning. The straight gate is literally the entrance into the spiritual kingdom of life, which is desperately what every believer should be seeking for. The straight gate. This should be the key that you seek and search for daily, is the entrance, the straight gate. The broad way is the way of the soul. It's literally the way of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. I know I've said this, but I just need to repeat it. Jesus said that very few will find, and then he says the entrance to what? Life. He's not talking about heaven. I know that we've said the entrance to life, that refers to heaven. That's absolutely not what he's talking about. He's talking to life, which is in the spirit realm. He said there are few that will find it. There are few that find it. The word find is literally, there are few that will ever see and be able to perceive the entrance into life, into the kingdom, into the spiritual realm of God. Right after this kingdom teaching in Matthew 7, Jesus goes on in verses 15 through 20. Beware of false prophets, which come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they're ravening wolves. You shall know them by their fruits. Do men gather grapes of thorns or figs of thistles? Even so, every good tree brings forth good fruit, but a corrupt tree brings forth evil fruit. A good tree cannot bring forth evil fruit, neither can a corrupt tree bring forth good fruit. Not every tree that brings not forth good fruit is hewn down, again cast into the fire. This relates to everything that Jesus was teaching. Again, this isn't talking about hell. This is talking about the soul and the spirit. When he's talking about good trees and bad trees, he's talking about what abides in every one of us personally. He's not talking about the bad fruit of somebody else. He's talking about the bad fruit of your own soul. He's not talking about the good fruit of somebody else. He's talking about the good fruit of your own spirit. Every tree that brings not forth good fruit is hewn down again and cast into the fire. Wherefore by their fruits you shall know them. When? When they stand before God on the day of the judgment of the kingdom, by their fruits at that time will be revealed what their life was really about. Was it about the soul? Their Cain desperately trying to please God by work? Or was it about the spirit man? I want to talk about this just for a couple of minutes. You've got to look at this through the eyes of Jesus and not through the eyes of the Christian teacher who explained this to you. Every one of us had Christian teachers and preachers throughout the years who have explained these things to us, and they explained it through an explanation without sight, without vision. Remember, very few find the entrance to the kingdom. Multitudes, though, find the way of the soul, the broad way. False prophets. Look at verse 15. This doesn't mean what you think it means. Beware of false prophets, which come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ravening wolves. False prophets are literally men who preach and teach through soulish eyes. Everybody's always afraid this is talking about Jim Jones or David Koresh or some other crazy. This is absolutely not what he's talking about. How many know that's the most obvious thing? The most obvious things are followed by Broadway people. We're looking for the straight gate, the narrow way. We've got to get off that broad way of thought. We've got to see through the eyes of Christ. False prophets. False prophets have a strong fixation, obsession, fetish, and fascination, even literally almost a mania with religious knowledge of good and evil. I have talked to many men who have almost a mania with the knowledge of good and evil. They open the broad way to the multitudes. These prophets that Jesus is talking about are literally men who open the thoughts of the broad way of the soul to the multitudes. There are millions, literally millions, sitting in churches today learning the broad way of the soul. Literally, countless millions. And they're led by what Jesus referred to as false prophets. It doesn't mean that they're crazy going to make people drink Kool-Aid with cyanide in it. It's talking about literally men who teach from the way of the good and evil, from the knowledge of good and evil. The broad way. They open the broad way to the multitudes. Jesus said this, inwardly they are ravening wolves. Listen, this is literally a horribly butchered and misunderstood translation. Horribly butchered. Not sure what they were thinking. The phrase, wolf in sheep's clothing. How many have ever heard that? He's a wolf in sheep's clothing. That was created from this verse. In fact, if you look it up, they'll say this was a quotation by Jesus that this verse came about, or that this saying came about, the wolf in sheep's clothing. How many ever read Aesop's Fables? We had books when I was a little kid, Aesop's Fables. Aesop wrote fables, and he wrote about wolf in sheep's clothing. And this literally, that saying, it was falsely credited to Aesop as it was widely read in his books. So, how do you make a bad translation reputable? What is the best way to make something reputable? Have the church and the world repeat it. If the church believes something and the world believes the same thing and everybody's saying the same thing, how many all of a sudden realize that this verse becomes about wolves in sheep's clothing? And everybody knows that a wolf in sheep's clothing is a man who says one thing, but on the inside he's something else. That is an absolute false translation that the broad way of Christianity has made men follow. The church and the world have both repeated it. How many realize by now that if the majority of people believe something, it's known as the broad way? If you want to know if something's true or false spiritually, ask anybody. The majority of people. Take a poll. And if most of the people believe that it's true, question it. Because it's probably not. So, this scripture, when translated by the soul, is talking about how the true nature of men is revealed by their words and their actions. If you translate it according to the soul. Is it true? Absolutely. Is it truth? Well, that's another animal altogether. There's a big difference between what is true and what is truth. Comparing true and truth is like comparing apples and microwaves. This parable isn't saying that under a sheep's skin is a big bad wolf. Jesus uses the word ravening. The word ravening literally is the word rapacious. That clears that up, doesn't it? It literally translates ambitiously acquiring. How many know that Christianity is rapacious? Do you believe that Christianity is rapacious? Is the Pope Catholic? How many understand that Christianity literally has a very ambitious agenda? How many understand that this is really seen during election years? They even made Donald Trump say he was a Christian. I have a favorite verse, but I'm not sure where it is or what it says. How many understand that in a kingdom, an ambitious agenda can get you in trouble with the king? Part of the ambitious Christian agenda is the desperate desire to make everyone play by the rules of their do-good religion. It's true that Christianity has a bizarre mentality. Here's their ambitious agenda. A, it is make everyone believe and convert to Christianity. Or B, make everyone at least pretend to be Christians by their actions. And if I'm lying, I'm dying. Is it true? I read all the time about books about how missionaries go into these countries. And these men who aren't Christians talk about the missionaries that come into the countries. And he said the missionaries, the biggest focus of missionaries is always, literally, to change the behavior of the tribe. So they give them Nike shirts. And I always wonder, you see these Africans and these tribes, these real remote villages, and they all wear Nike shirts. And I'm thinking, how did they get Nike shirts in Africa? And it's because they, sex is the biggest thing. You want to stamp that fire out. And I was reading about this guy, and he said, literally, in the Christian's eyes, sex is the baddest thing that you can do. So you go in and you tell everybody, all right, now stop having sex with everybody else and wear their shirt. And they say, okay, now be good. Okay. And everybody says, well, we changed their actions. We succeeded. And they go to the next village. It's either change them into a Christian or at least make them act like it. But how many know that that happens like right now, like I said with Donald Trump? So Jesus said, listen, Donald, if you want to run this country, you will at least have a Bible verse. And all the Christians go, we're voting for him now. So Jesus said, beware of false prophets, also known as ravening wolves. Then look what he says in verse 16 again. Did I give you that one, Steve? Sorry. You shall know them by their fruits. Do men gather grapes of thorns or figs of thistles? So let me ask you this. When Jesus was talking about knowing men by their fruit, was he talking about carnal things or spiritual things? Remember. Very good. Was he talking about carnal things or spiritual things? Yes. Jesus is amazing. Everything he taught was cryptic. Do you know what the word cryptic means? It means mysterious, enigmatic. It means confusing or ambiguous. It means obscure. All of Jesus' teachings had a double meaning. All. Everything Jesus taught could be taken through the soul or by the Spirit. This is why when the soul sees it and says, we're right, guess what? They are. But the spirit man knows that there's something more. That the multitude in the Broadway of the soul didn't see yet. The spirit man goes, I know there's something there because this can't be it. It can't be me acting good wearing a Nike shirt. All of Jesus' teaching have a double meaning. One is easily found, seen, and understood by the soul. The other is encrypted for the spirit alone. An encrypted message is encoded so that it can only be read by the sender and the intended recipient. An encrypted message is encoded so that it can only be read by the sender and by the intended recipient. So when God sends something by His Spirit and it's encrypted, there are only certain ones that are going to get it. Certain recipients. The rest get the soulish side. And we all know and understand it and teach it and have taught it. The part that makes Jesus' message so confusing and misleading is that it speaks to the shallow and also to the deep. He's been telling me this for such a long time and I've never preached it. He speaks to the shallow and also to the deep. Matthew 11:25. At that time Jesus answered and said, I thank thee, O Father, Lord of heaven and earth, because thou hast hid these things from the wise and the prudent, and hast revealed them unto babes. Even so, Father, for so it seemed good in thy sight. I'm going to tell you something today. One second. I'm going to tell you something today. Thank you, though, because I would have missed it. This is going to amaze you. Something from one of the most common verses you've read and read and read and read. And I desperately sought it because I always know there's something more. There's something more. All these things are delivered unto me of my Father, and no man knows the Son but the Father. Neither knows any man the Father except the Son. Now listen, and whoever the Son chooses to reveal him to. It doesn't say everyone, because the Broadway people don't see this. He said there are a few. There are very few that I'm going to reveal it to. Few that find it. The wise and the prudent Jesus was talking about. My Father doesn't show this himself to the wise and the prudent. The wise and the prudent is a reference to the soulish way of seeing. The word prudent means sagacious, which everybody already knew. The word literally translates knowledgeable, discerning, thoughtful, and insightful. It's the people that you honor and respect. It's not talking about wackos or people without a good reputation. This is talking about men and women with an amazing reputation who seem wise, knowledgeable, discerning, thoughtful, insightful. He said God doesn't reveal it to them. There are many Christian teachers and preachers who teach insightful information to the souls of men. They are wise and prudent, and their teaching comes with great knowledge and great confidence. They have a massive amount of mentally attained information on how to live, and to the soul, it all sounds spiritual. But Jesus said that the Father hides the deep things from those, and He gives encryption to babes. That's what He said. He said He hides it for babes. The word babes is a Greek word, negation. The ones literally, which means, this is literally what it means. Denial, contrary, or the opposite. The coin has two sides, the soul and the spirit. He said He literally hides it for those who operate on the opposite side of the soul. Those who deny and are contrary to the soul. Mark 8:34. And when He had called the people also unto Him with His disciples also, He said unto them, Whosoever will come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. For whosoever will save his life shall lose it, but whosoever shall lose his life for my sake and the gospel's, the same shall save it. When you begin to walk your walk as a believer. You ready? I want to show you something. When you begin your walk as a believer in Jesus Christ, your life changes as you deny your old ways. How many have seen that? You know what you've just become is an immature carnal Christian. Your focus and continual awareness has to do with learning about Jesus. And it's all done through the tree of knowledge of good and evil, how to live. If you progress, and many do, if you progress, you will go from an immature carnal Christian to a mature carnal Christian. Wow. It's just truth. The mature are those who have conquered their carnal nature and now lead new recruits down carnally righteous paths. Because righteous means one thing to the carnal and another thing to the spiritual. Holy means one thing to the carnal and another thing to the spiritual. The mature carnal teach the newbies about how to walk in victory over the flesh. Do new Christians need this teaching? I believe they do. This is part of the process that God has determined for the growth of believers. Is there anything wrong with that? Remember, in Rick Joyner's book, he said there were those on the low levels. And he said, I never fought against them. I honored them for where they stood. I didn't fight against them. I just continued to climb. How many remember that in the Final Quest? I didn't remember that, think of that till just now, but I just remembered it. He said that same thing. It's really cool that God gives me the same mentality. I didn't even refer to that. So when the mature carnal believers become teachers and lead immature newbies into their victory over the flesh, is there life in their teaching? Now wait a minute, don't answer that. This is where men become confused. You know, I wouldn't even know this except my brother Steve brought this point up last week. And he said, Dan, let me ask you a question. And I went, you're on the marriage thing. And so this point came from him. This is where men become confused. Carnal teaching contains a type of life which has the potential to mature and bear fruit that men love. Look at Genesis 4:3-5. In the process of time, it came to pass that Cain brought of the fruit of the ground an offering to the Lord. And Abel also brought of the firstlings of his flock and of the fat thereof. And the Lord had respect to Abel and his offering, but unto Cain and to his offering he had no respect, and Cain was very wroth, and his countenance fell. When Cain offered God the fruit of his soul, listen, it was rejected. Not Cain as a person, but Cain the fruit bearer. So Cain brings the fruit of his soul. You've got to understand, the man was meticulous, I'm sure. And when he brings the fruit and God rejects it, Cain was shocked and confused. Why? So let me ask you this. Did Cain's fruit offering have life? Absolutely. Doesn't fruit have life? An apple tree is a living organism that brings forth a living fruit. Isn't that true? Read about it. Apples literally move in order to ripen themselves, in order to it's almost like they have a will and a mind of their own. Their movement is so slow that most people never realize that an apple literally progresses through movement in its growth. So what was the difference between the offering of Cain and the offering of Abel? Cain's fruit and Abel's lamb both had life. Cain's fruit and Abel's lamb both had breath. Did you know that fruit breathes? It does. Both had breath, but only Abel's offering had breath that moved. The breath of Cain's offering was static, it was unchanged, it was fixed and stable. It is a picture of the soul. The soul's fruit wants nothing more than stability. If I could just get it right, if I could just get it together, if I could just be stable like that. This is always the MO of carnal fruit. It is changeless, and it affects nothing in the kingdom of God. Nothing. Look what Jesus said in John 3:5. Jesus answered, "Verily, verily, I say to you, except a man be born of water and of the Spirit, he cannot enter into the kingdom of God. That which is born of the flesh is flesh, that which is born of the Spirit is spirit. Marvel not that I said unto thee, ye must be born again. The wind blows where it lists, you hear the sound of it, but you can't tell where it comes from or where it goes. So is everyone that is born of the Spirit." You know, I started this seeking in this realm when a nephew of mine asked me a question. He said, "What does that verse mean, Uncle Dan?" And I said, "I have no idea." Jesus said this, in order to enter the kingdom. Every time we say kingdom, we should have a chant that goes, in order to enter the kingdom, and everybody should go, "Not heaven!" Every time you hear the word kingdom, you should instantly shout, "Not heaven!" That would help you remember. In order to enter the kingdom, you're a good bunch. This is what he said. You ready? This is going to shock you. This is going to change the way you think. This is going to change your mind. You must be born, and then you must be born again. A new believer is born as a tree of knowledge of good and evil, carnal believer. He progressively matures into a tree of knowledge of good and evil, mature fruit, carnal believer. He can die and go to heaven in this happy state, or he can be born again. This is phenomenal. The spirit man is not static. Like the wind, he affects all that he comes in contact with. Just like Jesus. How many more than anything want to be a spirit man? Is there anything else? Is there anything else? The wind affects everything that it comes in contact with. Like the spirit man Jesus is talking about. As the spiritual increases like the wind, it becomes more and more violently affecting all that it comes in contact with is wrecked. Let me ask you this question. It's kind of a trick question, so I wouldn't answer it. How many want to be used by God to wreck the world that you live in? Let me ask you this question. How many would rather be used by God to be violently affecting to the world that he lives in? Jesus said that all men must follow the same process or mode of progression. The destination focus for the soul is heaven. The destination focus for the spirit is the kingdom. John 3:5 again. Jesus answered, "Verily, verily, I say unto you, except a man be born of water and the Spirit, he cannot enter into the kingdom of God." Born of water is a type that represents a natural birth. All babies are born of water in the natural realm. All Christians receive their start with a gush of truth that whisks them into a new world. Isn't that true? You remember that? And that's literally what it's like. It's like the water's breaking. It's just like the natural realm child. He matures from a water baby to a fully developed water adult. This is the broad way of believing. You will never hear a sermon that will explain it better than this. I can't imagine. This is like simple. God did this for us. The straight gate that leads to the kingdom will be discovered by few. Why? Because only a few will seek it out. Why? Because the majority won't ever even know that it exists. Many who hear of its existence will think it's nothing but a myth or a legend and will never take it seriously enough to pursue it. Some will believe it, but will refuse to lay down what they possess in order to pursue something so elusive. Because of this, multitudes will be born as believers, but very, very few will ever be born again. It's a brutally difficult decision to go from a child to an adult and then start over as a child again. Why would anyone want to? Because that's where God's real presence is. Look at Matthew 13, verse 45. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like unto treasure in the field, which when a man is found, he hides, and for joy thereof goes and sells all that he has, and he buys that field. The treasure is hidden in or below or under the field. I know I preached this before many months ago, but I want to show this example one more time because I really liked it. The field represents the carnal soul. The one who is born as a Christian plows and plants and works the field, desperately attempting to extract a beautiful harvest of fruit for God, just like Cain. Cain wants love and joy and peace and patience, kindness and goodness and gentleness and meekness and temperance. And he can get that out of that field as he develops and cultivates that field. But how many understand that there's a difference between a farmer and a person who is a miner? A farmer takes great satisfaction from a beautifully manicured field. Have you ever had a garden and you looked out at your garden and all the weeds were gone? And your garden was beautiful and the fruit was ripe. And you went, oh, there's something so satisfying about that. He plows and he tills and he plants the shallow part. Have you ever planted a garden and dug a 10-foot ditch and your wife came out and said, what are you doing? I'm planting a garden. All she can see is dirt coming out of the ditch. It's like a grave. Who in their right mind does that? Nobody. Right? You don't dig deep ditches to plant gardens, do you? You till the top, and you cultivate the top, and you plant the top. The shallow part. It's all wonderfully groomed for his soulish pleasure. All who see it are either in awe or envy. Isn't that true? It's just like the soul. Those in awe give the farmer honor, and they praise his work. Those in envy despise him for making them feel guilty and very inadequate about their own field. Who are you to judge us? Making us feel inadequate about our field just because your field is so meticulously groomed. Herein lies the joy of Christianity. But the miner has a completely different agenda. He doesn't have any concern for the shallow beauty of the field. He's seeking a different type of fruit. He's seeking that which will withstand the fire of God. The soul is desperately avoiding the fire of hell. Cain fears fire. The Spirit is seeking that which will withstand the fire of God, and that which is true.